It was supposed to be a routine morning in the county. A cup of black coffee, a stack of sealed indictments, and a quiet walk into the courthouse. Instead, it ended with cold steel handcuffs biting into the wrists of the most powerful legal figure in the district. When a hot-headed patrolman decided to aggressively profile a black woman carrying classified documents, he didn't just make a mistake. He dug a grave for his entire career, because the woman he arrested in the rain wasn't a criminal. She was his newly appointed supervising judge. Judge Camille Thornton was not a woman who believed in coincidences. After years ascending the brutal, hyper-political ladder of the state justice system, she had learned that every delayed meeting, every misplaced file, and every overly aggressive police patrol had a root cause. She had just been sworn in as the chief administrative judge of the district court. Her appointment had ruffled feathers. She was an outsider, a black woman brought in from the appellate courts of a neighboring district specifically to clean up a notoriously corrupt judicial and law enforcement ecosystem. The crown jewel of that corruption was the local precinct. The sky over the city was a bruised, heavy purple threatening a torrential downpour. Camille sat in the driver's seat of a rented silver sedan parked a few blocks away from the courthouse. Her usual vehicle, a sleek black SUV with official judicial plates, was in the shop after a suspicious tire blowout recently. She hadn't reported the blowout. She knew exactly who had left the nails in her driveway. On the passenger seat sat a heavily weighted, thick leather satchel. Inside were several manila folders wrapped in thick red rubber bands stamped with bold black letters. Sealed. Eyes only. These were the internal affairs wiretaps and grand jury witness testimonies directly implicating multiple officers in the precinct in an extortion and evidence tampering ring. Camille had spent the entire night reviewing the files in the safety of her home. Today, she was bringing them to her secure chambers to sign the arrest warrants. She looked down at her attire. Because of the early hour and the miserable weather, she had forgone her usual tailored suits. Instead, she wore dark, loose-fitting joggers, a simple gray cashmere sweater, and an oversized beige trench coat to protect the files from the rain. A dark baseball cap was pulled low over her braids to shield her eyes from the biting wind. Without the black robe, she didn't look like the iron-fisted chief judge. She looked like an ordinary civilian. She turned the key in the ignition, the rental car's engine purring quietly, and drove the remaining short distance to the courthouse. She bypassed the main public parking structure and navigated toward the alleyway that led to the secure gated lot reserved strictly for senior judges and top-tier court administrators. She swiped her new gold-chipped security badge at the terminal. The heavy iron gate groaned and rolled open. Camille pulled the sedan into the designated spot marked for the chief judge. A short distance away, idling in a squad car shrouded by the morning mist, sat Officer Derek Harlan and his rookie partner, Officer Nolan Pierce. Harlan was a veteran of the precinct, a man whose personnel file was a patchwork of excessive force complaints, civilian harassment allegations, and lost dashcam footage. He was built like a fire hydrant and operated with the unearned arrogance of a man who believed the badge was a license to do whatever he pleased. He was exactly the kind of officer Camille had been brought in to remove. "God, I hate this shift," Harlan muttered, taking a sip of lukewarm, bitter coffee from a styrofoam cup. He tossed the cup onto the dashboard. Nothing happens before the morning rush, just garbage trucks and stragglers. Pierce, a young rookie fresh out of the academy, kept his eyes glued to the rain-slicked streets. "The captain said we need to increase visibility around the courthouse. High-profile hearings this week." "The captain's an idiot," Harlan sneered. "Nobody is hitting the courthouse at this hour." As Harlan turned his head to glare at the imposing granite structure of the courthouse, his eyes caught movement in the alleyway. Through the drizzle, he saw a silver sedan, a basic generic vehicle with standard commercial plates, slip through the security gate into the VIP judge's lot. Harlan narrowed his eyes. He knew every vehicle that belonged in that lot. This cheap rental car didn't belong. "Look at this," Harlan said, throwing the cruiser into gear. "We got a lost sheep." "Brad, the gate opened for them," Pierce noted, his voice laced with caution. "They must have a pass." "Nobody driving a fleet rental has a pass for the judicial lot, kid. Probably some cleaning staff trying to score free parking, or some paralegal sneaking in early. Or maybe it's someone looking to break into the cars." Harlan's pulse quickened. He was bored, highly caffeinated, and looking for a target to exercise his authority on. He flipped on the flashing red and blue lights, though he left the siren off and accelerated down the alley. The iron gate was slowly beginning to close behind Camille's car. Harlan gunned the engine, slipping the cruiser through the gap just before the gate latched shut. In the reserved parking space, Camille turned off the engine, picked up her heavy leather satchel, and unbuckled her seatbelt. She had a couple of hours to prep the warrants before the court officially opened. Just as she pushed her door open and stepped out into the freezing drizzle, the blinding glare of police light bars washed over her. Camille froze, squinting against the strobe lights. A patrol car had aggressively angled itself right behind her rental, blocking her in completely. The driver's side door of the cruiser kicked open. Officer Derek Harlan stepped out, his hand resting casually but purposefully on the butt of his service weapon. "Hey you, stop right there and put your hands on the roof of the car!" Harlan barked, his voice echoing off the brick walls of the alley. Camille Thornton took a deep, stabilizing breath. She knew the law. She knew her rights. And looking at the badge number illuminated by the cruiser's headlights, she instantly recognized the man stepping toward her. It was Officer Derek Harlan, the very man whose name was plastered across the sealed indictments currently resting in her satchel. The chess match had just begun. "I said, put your hands on the roof of the car," Harlan shouted again, closing the distance between them. Rain was beginning to fall harder now, slicking the pavement and drumming against the metal of the vehicles. Camille did not put her hands on the car. Instead, she stood perfectly straight, clutching the leather satchel containing the court files tightly to her chest. She pushed the brim of her cap up slightly, her dark, piercing eyes meeting Harlan's aggressive stare. "Officer," Camille said, her voice calm, modulated, and projecting the natural authority of a woman used to commanding a courtroom. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. I am authorized to park here." Harlan scoffed, looking her up and down. He saw a black woman in sweatpants, a bulky coat, and a baseball cap driving a cheap rental. In his heavily prejudiced mind, the math was already done. She was a trespasser, a liar, and now defying a direct order. "Authorized. Oh, you're authorized," Harlan mocked, stepping within a few feet of her. The smell of stale coffee and cheap cologne wafted off him. Officer Pierce nervously stepped out of the passenger side, hanging back near the rear of the cruiser. "This is a restricted lot for judges, lady, not for the cleaning crew, and definitely not for people driving cheap rental cars. Let me see your ID." "My identification is in my briefcase, which is in the trunk of the vehicle," Camille explained, her tone remaining completely even. "If you will allow me to open the trunk, I will gladly provide it to you. Furthermore, I suggest you lower your voice and step back. You are operating outside of your jurisdiction in a secured county facility." Harlan's face flushed red. He wasn't used to being spoken to with such precise, unyielding defiance, especially not from someone he deemed beneath him. He pointed a thick, gloved finger at her face. "Don't you tell me how to do my job. You're trespassing on restricted government property. For all I know, you're out here trying to break into the judge's cars. Now hand over whatever is in that bag and step against the vehicle." Camille's grip on the satchel tightened. Inside were the unredacted testimonies of victims Harlan had extorted. If he got his hands on these files, the entire grand jury investigation would be compromised. The files would disappear before they ever reached the precinct. "No," Camille said. The word hung in the cold air, sharp as glass. Harlan blinked, momentarily stunned. "Excuse me?" "I said no. You do not have probable cause or reasonable suspicion to execute a search of my person or my property. This bag contains highly sensitive, legally privileged court documents. You will not touch them. I am going to reach into my pocket, retrieve my keys, and open my trunk to show you my identification. That is all that is going to happen here." Harlan's ego snapped. "You're not reaching for a damn thing." He roared. He lunged forward, closing the gap in a split second. He grabbed Camille's left arm, his grip painfully tight, and violently yanked her toward him. The sudden physical assault threw her off balance. The leather satchel slipped from her grasp and hit the wet pavement with a heavy thud. The clasp broke open, and the manila folders spilled out. The bright red rubber bands held the thick stacks of paper together, but the bold black stamps were clearly visible in the harsh police lights. Sealed, eyes only. District Court. Harlan looked down at the files. His eyes widened. He didn't know exactly what they were, but he knew what court documents looked like. "Stealing court files, huh?" Harlan breathed, a sickening grin spreading across his face. He felt totally vindicated. "Oh, you are going away for a long time, lady." Officer Harlan, Camille said, her voice dropping an octave, losing any trace of civilian politeness. It was the voice of a judge delivering a sentence. If you do not remove your hand from my arm this instant, you will be facing federal charges for the assault of a state official and the obstruction of justice. Look at me. Look at my face. But Harlan wasn't listening. He was high on the adrenaline of the power trip. Pierce, get the files, he barked to his rookie partner. Wait, Brad, Pierce stammered, stepping forward, his eyes darting between Camille's unshakable posture and the official-looking documents on the ground. She knows your name, and she speaks like, maybe we should let her get her ID. This doesn't feel right. She knows my name because it's right here on my badge, you idiot, Harlan snapped. He violently spun Camille around, slamming her chest and face against the wet, cold metal of the rental car's roof. Camille gasped as the breath was knocked out of her. The cold metal bit through her sweater. Pain flared in her shoulder as Harlan wrenched her arms behind her back. Let him do it, a cold, calculating voice whispered in Camille's mind. Let him hang himself completely. Let him violate every single protocol. The moment I reveal who I am, he'll backpedal, apologize, and the union will sweep it under the rug. No, I want him on camera. I want him fully committed to his own destruction. Stop resisting, Harlan yelled, though Camille was entirely compliant, letting her body go limp to avoid injury. Click, click. The heavy steel handcuffs locked around Camille Thornton's wrists. They were on far too tight, digging into her skin, cutting off the circulation. You're under arrest for trespassing, resisting arrest, and the grand theft of classified government property. Harlan sneered, leaning in so close Camille could feel his breath on her neck. You picked the wrong day to steal from the courthouse, sweetheart. You are making a catastrophic mistake, Camille whispered against the roof of the car. The only mistake here was you getting out of bed, Harlan replied. He pulled her up roughly by the chain of the handcuffs, ignoring her wince of pain. He dragged her toward the rear of the police cruiser. Officer Pierce stood frozen in the rain, staring at the scattered files on the ground. He bent down and carefully picked up the heavy manila folders. The water beaded off the thick paper. He looked at the bold stamp, District Court. He looked up at the woman being shoved into the caged back seat of their cruiser. She wasn't yelling. She wasn't crying. She wasn't begging. She was watching them with the predatory stillness of a hawk. A deep, terrible pit opened in Pierce's stomach. Brad, Pierce said quietly, walking over with the files. We should verify her identity, right now. Just open her trunk. Harlan slammed the back door of the cruiser shut, trapping Camille inside the dark cage partition back seat. We'll verify her identity at booking, kid. Once they're in cuffs, they're property of the precinct until the desk sergeant says otherwise. Put the stolen files in the trunk. Let's go. As Harlan swaggered around to the driver's side, feeling like the hero of his own imaginary movie, Camille sat perfectly still in the back. The rain pounded against the windows. The handcuffs dug into her wrists. She glanced up at the small surveillance camera mounted in the corner of the cruiser's cage. It was blinking red. Recording. Good, Camille thought. Record every second. The drive to the precinct took only a short time. For Camille sitting in the cramped, hard plastic back seat of the cruiser, it was a masterclass in psychological endurance. Her wrists throbbed with a dull, rising agony, the metal cuffs biting deeper with every pothole Harlan intentionally hit. In the front seat, Harlan was riding high. He grabbed the radio mic. Dispatch, this is Unit 4 Bravo. We are returning to the house with one female in custody. Charges of trespassing, resisting, and felony theft of government documents. Copy that, 4 Bravo, the dispatcher crackled back. We got a live one, kid, Harlan chuckled, glancing at Pierce. Caught her dead to rights in the VIP lot, trying to make off with sealed docket. The captain is gonna love this. Might even get a commendation for protecting the courthouse. Pierce didn't answer. He was staring straight ahead, his hands sweating on his knees. He couldn't shake the feeling that they had just stepped off a cliff and hadn't hit the ground yet. He glanced at the rearview mirror. The woman in the back wasn't thrashing or screaming profanities like normal callers. She was just sitting there, staring a hole into the back of Harlan's head. Her eyes were sharp, calculating, taking mental inventory of everything in the car. Hey, lady, Harlan called back over his shoulder, his voice dripping with condescension. You got a name, or are we booking you as Jane Doe? Camille remained completely silent. Silent treatment, huh? That's fine. We got a fingerprint scanner at the station. We'll find out what rock you crawled out from under. Camille shifted her jaw, keeping her breathing steady. She was meticulously cataloging every violation: unlawful detention, assault, failure to read Miranda rights, unlawful seizure of property. The list of infractions was growing long enough to not only fire Harlan, but to send him to federal prison. The irony that she was sitting in a police car handcuffed, while the very documents required to arrest the man driving the car were sitting in the trunk, was not lost on her. It was poetic justice, and Camille intended to see it through to a devastating finale. The cruiser pulled into the gated rear lot of the precinct. It was a bleak, brutalist brick building that had stood for decades. The walls seemed to sweat institutional decay. This was the belly of the beast. This was the headquarters of Captain Victor Langston's corrupt empire. Harlan threw the car in park and killed the engine. He stepped out into the rain, marched over to the rear door, and yanked it open. "End of the line! Out!" Harlan ordered. When Camille moved too slowly for his liking, her balance thrown off by her bound hands, Harlan reached in and grabbed her by the bicep, practically hauling her out onto the pavement. Her knees buckled slightly, but she caught herself, standing tall despite the awkward, painful position of her arms. Pierce retrieved the leather satchel full of court files from the trunk. He held it carefully, almost reverently, as if it were a bomb waiting to go off. Harlan marched Camille toward the heavy steel back doors of the precinct. "Walk. Keep your eyes forward." They entered the bustling, chaotic atmosphere of the precinct's rear booking area. Fluorescent lights buzzed aggressively overhead, casting a sickly pale glow over the peeling linoleum floors. Uniformed officers milled about, drinking coffee, typing up reports, or loudly interrogating suspects chained to heavy wooden benches. The air smelled of sweat, cheap industrial cleaner, and stale anxiety. "Hey, Harlan," an officer called out from a nearby desk. "Who's the prize?" "Courthouse thief," Harlan bragged loudly, ensuring half the room heard him. "Caught her trying to boost sealed files from the judge's lot." Laughter rippled through a few of the nearby cops. Camille ignored them. Her eyes swept the room, taking in the layout, the faces, the lack of discipline. She saw a suspect bleeding from a lip with no medical attention. She saw evidence bags sitting unsecured on open desks. It was a circus. Harlan shoved her toward the high wooden counter of the booking desk. Sitting behind the elevated platform, looking exhausted and annoyed, was Desk Sergeant Malcolm Voss. Voss was a gray-haired veteran who looked like he had been born with a scowl. "What do we got, Harlan?" Voss asked, not looking up from his computer monitor as his thick fingers pecked at the keyboard. "Jane Doe," Harlan said, slamming his hand flat on the counter. "Caught her in the restricted lot at the courthouse. She had a bag full of sealed court documents, trespassing, resisting, and felony theft." Voss finally looked up. He looked at the woman in the oversized trench coat, dripping wet, hands cuffed tightly behind her back. He noted her posture. Most people in cuffs slouched. They avoided eye contact. They looked scared or angry. This woman looked like she owned the building. "Take her hat off," Voss grunted. "Standard protocol, Harlan. You know that." Harlan reached over and snatched the baseball cap off Camille's head, tossing it onto the counter. Her dark braids fell around her shoulders. She slowly raised her chin, locking eyes directly with Desk Sergeant Voss. "Pierce, put the evidence on the desk," Harlan instructed. Pierce stepped forward nervously and placed the heavy leather satchel and the manila folders on the high wooden counter. Voss looked at the files. He saw the red rubber bands. He saw the bold black stamps. Sealed. Eyes only. District Court. Voss's eyebrows furrowed. He reached out and touched one of the folders. The paper was high quality, heavy stock, real court documents. "Did she break into a judge's car?" Voss asked, his tone suddenly dropping its bored affectation. "Don't know. She won't talk," Harlan said, leaning against the counter. "Caught her getting out of a cheap rental. Refused to give ID. Fought me when I tried to secure the stolen property." "I didn't fight you, Officer Harlan." Camille spoke for the first time since the parking lot. Her voice sliced through the noisy booking room like a scalpel. The surrounding chatter began to die down as nearby officers instinctively tuned in to the tone of pure authority. "I informed you that you lacked probable cause, and I denied you consent to search legally privileged documents. You then chose to physically assault me." Harlan barked a laugh. "Listen to her. Uses big words. She's a professional thief, Sarge. Book her." Desk Sergeant Voss didn't laugh. He was looking closely at Camille's face. There was something intensely familiar about her sharp cheekbones, the intense gaze, the absolute lack of fear. Voss read the local papers. He watched the municipal news channels. "Ma'am," Voss said, his voice cautious. "I need your name." Camille stood tall, the cuffs still grinding into her wrists. "My name is Camille Thornton." Voss's fingers froze over the keyboard. The name hung in the air. Camille Thornton. Behind Harlan, Pierce let out a quiet, terrified gasp. He remembered the morning briefing. The captain had passed around a memo. New chief administrative judge sworn in, Camille Thornton. Voss swallowed hard. He looked from Camille's face down to the sealed district court files, and then slowly over to the idiot grinning patrolman leaning on his desk. "Harlan," Voss said, his voice suddenly hollow, stripped of all color. "Where exactly did you say you arrested her?" "The VIP judge's lot, Sarge, like I said, right next to the spot marked for the chief judge. She was parked right in it." A pin drop could have been heard in the booking room. The silence spread like a virus as the realization hit every officer within earshot. Desk Sergeant Voss slowly stood up from his chair, his face completely drained of blood. He looked at Camille, taking in the cheap sweatpants, the rain-soaked coat, and the steel cuffs binding her hands. "Judge Thornton," Voss whispered, horrified. Harlan's grin vanished. He looked at Voss, then turned slowly to look at the black woman he had just violently slammed against a car and dragged into his precinct. "Yes, Sergeant Voss," Camille said, her voice echoing in the dead, silent room. "And I strongly suggest you tell your officer to remove these cuffs before I dismantle this precinct brick by brick." The silence in the precinct's booking room was no longer just quiet. It was suffocating. It was the kind of heavy, pressurized stillness that precedes a devastating explosion. Dozens of police officers previously wrapped up in the mundane chaos of their morning shifts were now frozen like statues, their eyes darting between Desk Sergeant Malcolm Voss and the black woman in the wet trench coat. Officer Derek Harlan let out a harsh, unnatural laugh that echoed awkwardly off the peeling walls. "Judge, Sarge, you're letting her play you," Harlan sneered, though a faint tremor had entered his voice. He pointed a finger at Camille. "Look at her. Does she look like the chief judge? She was driving a beat-up rental. She's a grifter. She probably read the name in the paper and is using it to—" "Shut your mouth, Harlan," Voss hissed, his voice venomous. A bead of cold sweat tracked down the side of the older sergeant's face. He had seen the official photographs. He had read the internal memos from the mayor's office. The woman standing in front of him, hands bound by his own patrolman, was unequivocally the Honorable Camille Thornton. "Sergeant," Camille said, her voice dropping the temperature in the room, "I will not repeat myself. Remove these restraints." Voss scrambled out from behind the high wooden counter, so fast his heavy utility belt caught on the edge of his chair, sending it crashing to the floor. He didn't bother to pick it up. He practically sprinted toward Camille, pulling his universal handcuff key from his pocket with shaking fingers. "Sarge, what are you doing?" Harlan demanded, stepping forward to intervene. "She's my caller. You can't just uncuff a felony suspect because she drops a name." "Stand down, Harlan. That is a direct order," Voss roared, his face purple with a mixture of terror and rage. He stepped behind Camille. Click, click. The steel jaws released their bite. Camille brought her arms forward slowly. She didn't rub her wrists. She simply held them up, turning them slightly so the harsh fluorescent lights illuminated the angry deep red gashes and bruising where the metal had dug into her skin. She made sure the precinct's overhead security cameras had a clear view of the injuries. "Sarge," Harlan protested, his ego desperately trying to outrun his sinking realization. "I caught her with sealed files. Look at them. She was trying to steal from the courthouse." "Those files," Camille stated clearly, turning to look directly at Harlan, "are the property of my court. They were in my personal possession. You unlawfully detained me. You assaulted me. You illegally searched my vehicle. And you stole classified documents that are part of an ongoing state investigation. You didn't catch a thief, Officer Harlan. You committed a federal crime on camera." Officer Nolan Pierce, who had been standing near the counter, clutching the leather satchel like a life preserver, took 2 distinct steps away from his partner. The rookie looked like he was going to be physically sick. Before Harlan could formulate another disastrous response, the heavy oak door to the precinct commander's office violently swung open. "What in the hell is going on out here?" boomed a gravelly, commanding voice. Captain Victor Langston strode out onto the floor. Langston was a man who looked exactly like the brutal politics he played, broad-shouldered, with silver hair slicked back, and a tailored uniform that fit him like a bespoke suit. He was the king of the precinct, a man deeply entrenched in the city's political machinery and a master at bearing civilian complaints. He marched toward the booking desk, prepared to dress down whatever officer was causing the disturbance. But as he pushed through the small crowd of paralyzed cops, his eyes landed on the woman standing by the counter. Langston stopped dead in his tracks, the color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure. "Captain," Camille said softly. It was not a greeting. It was a summons. "Judge Thornton," Langston stammered, his polished, untouchable aura vanishing in a microsecond. He looked at her wet clothes, the red marks on her wrists, and then at Derek Harlan, who was still hovering nearby with a look of confused defiance. Langston's experienced mind did the math instantly. It was a catastrophic sum. "Captain Langston," Camille replied, "your precinct certainly has an aggressive welcoming committee. Is this how you instruct your officers to greet the chief administrative judge?" This is a massive misunderstanding," Langston said, his voice tightening. He turned his glare onto Harlan. It was a look of pure, unadulterated hatred. "Harlan, what did you do?" "Cap, she was trespassing in the judge's lot," Harlan pleaded, finally sensing the absolute peril he was in. "She was driving a rental car. She wouldn't show ID. She was carrying sealed documents." "Because it is my lot. Because they are my documents." Camille's voice cracked like a whip, silencing the entire room. She took a step toward Langston, completely commanding the space. "My official vehicle was sabotaged recently, Captain. Heavy industrial nails driven into the sidewall of my tire while it was parked in my private gated driveway. So, I rented a car. As for the ID, your officer refused to let me retrieve it before he physically assaulted me, threw me against the vehicle, and applied handcuffs with malicious force." Langston closed his eyes for a brief second, visibly calculating the political fallout. It was radioactive. He opened his eyes and plastered on a mask of deep, accommodating concern. "Judge Thornton, I cannot apologize enough," Langston said smoothly, holding his hands up in a placating gesture. "This is a gross breach of protocol. Officer Harlan is an overzealous idiot, and he will be disciplined severely. We will wipe the booking record immediately. Let me get you a towel, some hot coffee, and I will personally drive you to the courthouse in my cruiser. We can handle this quietly, internally." Langston reached out toward the wooden counter, aiming for the manila folders sitting next to Camille's satchel. "I'll just take these securely to your—" Camille's hand slammed down on top of the files with the force of a gavel striking wood. "Do not touch those," she warned, her eyes locking onto Langston's with a terrifying intensity. "You do not have the clearance to view the contents of these folders, Captain, and we will absolutely not be handling this quietly." Langston's hand froze. He looked down at the bold black stamp. Sealed. Eyes only. A new darker fear began to blossom in his chest. "Judge," Langston said, lowering his voice so only she could hear, "please step into my office. Let's not do this out here on the floor." Camille stared at him for a long, torturous moment. Then she picked up her files, placed them carefully back into her leather satchel, and slung it over her uninjured shoulder. "Lead the way, Captain, and bring Officer Harlan. He's going to want to hear this." Captain Langston's office was designed to intimidate. It was paneled in dark mahogany, adorned with commendations, photographs with the mayor, and heavily armed tactical unit plaques. A massive polished oak desk dominated the center of the room. Camille walked in, ignoring the guest chairs, and walked directly around the desk. She sat down in Langston's high-backed leather chair. Langston stood near the doorway, his jaw tight. Harlan followed him in, looking like a dead man walking, while Officer Pierce lingered nervously in the hallway until Langston barked, "Get in here and shut the door, Pierce." The door clicked shut, sealing the four of them in a soundproof tomb. Camille placed the leather satchel on Langston's desk. She didn't speak immediately. She let the silence stretch, letting the anxiety in the room marinate until it was almost unbearable. She watched Harlan shifting his weight, rubbing the back of his neck. She watched Langston staring at the satchel. "I was appointed to this district for one specific reason, Captain," Camille finally began, her voice calm, conversational, and utterly lethal. "The state Supreme Court and the Attorney General's office have been analyzing the conviction rates, the internal affairs complaints, and the civil asset forfeiture records of this precinct for recent months. The numbers are, quite frankly, an embarrassment to the badge." "Judge," Langston interrupted, trying to regain control of his office. "If this is about Harlan, I assure you—" "Do not interrupt me," Camille said. The absolute authority in her tone sat Langston down in one of his own guest chairs. Harlan remained standing, rigid. "As I was saying," Camille continued, "I was brought in to sever the rot. Recently, I finalized the review of a multi-agency task force investigation. I had the sealed indictments ready. I was bringing them to my chambers to sign the arrest warrants this morning." She reached into the satchel and pulled out the first thick manila folder. She snapped the red rubber band off and opened it. "Let's look at the charges, shall we?" Camille said, trailing a perfectly manicured finger down the top sheet of paper. "Officer Derek Harlan." Harlan flinched as his name was read. "Multiple counts of aggravated assault under color of authority," Camille read. "Multiple counts of evidence tampering, multiple counts of extorting local business owners, and 1 count of witness intimidation, specifically involving a young woman who caught you planting narcotics in her brother's vehicle on a cell phone video. A video, I might add, that we recovered from a cloud server after you unlawfully destroyed her physical phone." Harlan's face went chalk white. His knees visibly buckled, and he had to grab the back of Langston's chair to steady himself. That's a lie," he whispered, but there was no conviction in it. "It's not a lie, Brad," Officer Pierce spoke up from the back of the room, his voice shaking. Everyone turned to look at the rookie. Pierce swallowed hard. "Internal Affairs pulled me in recently. They asked me about the patrols. They showed me the dash cam footage you thought you deleted." "You rat!" Harlan lunged toward his partner, but Langston jumped up and slammed a heavy hand against Harlan's chest, shoving him back. "Sit down and shut up, Harlan," Langston roared, his polished facade cracking completely. He turned back to Camille, desperately trying to salvage his own survival. "Judge Thornton, I swear to you, I had no idea Harlan was operating like this. If I had known—" "Save the performance, Captain," Camille cut him off, her eyes narrowing into dangerous slits. She reached into the satchel and pulled out the second manila folder. She snapped the rubber band. "Let's continue," Camille said softly. "Captain Victor Langston." The blood left Langston's face so fast, he looked like a corpse. He fell back into his chair. "You didn't think I was just here for a rogue patrolman, did you?" Camille asked, leaning forward, resting her elbows on his desk. "Let's review your file, Captain. Conspiracy to commit wire fraud, racketeering, multiple counts of receiving illegal kickbacks from a local bail bonds agency officially owned by your brother-in-law. Oh, and my personal favorite, directing your officers to systematically reroute confiscated cash from narcotics raids into a precinct slush fund that paid for your vacation home." You can't prove any of that," Langston gasped, his chest heaving as a panic attack threatened to overtake him. "That's hearsay. That's a witch hunt." "We have the bank transfers, Victor," Camille stated coldly, dropping his title. "We have the wiretaps from the phones you bought using burner accounts. We have the sworn testimony of several of your own sergeants who took plea deals recently to avoid federal prison. The walls aren't closing in, Captain. They are already closed." Langston's eyes darted frantically around the room. He looked at his locked door. He looked at the heavy brass paperweight on his desk. His mind, backed into a corner, was cycling through desperate, violent options. Camille saw the shift in his eyes. She knew exactly what he was calculating. "Don't even think about it," Camille warned, leaning back in the chair, totally relaxed. "You think my tire blowing out recently was a surprise? I expected you to try and slow me down. You think I drove a cheap rental car this morning by accident?" Langston frowned, confusion battling the panic. "What?" "The silver sedan." Camille smiled, a sharp, terrifying expression. "It belongs to the state attorney general's fleet. It is a bait car. It is wired with multiple hidden, high-definition cameras, external microphones, and a continuous GPS uplink to the state police barracks." Harlan let out a whimpering sound. "Every single thing Officer Harlan did to me in that parking lot was broadcast live, in real time to a federal task force," Camille explained, watching the utter destruction of their hope. "The moment he put handcuffs on me, he triggered a designated emergency protocol. Do you know what happens when a sitting chief administrative judge is taken hostage by corrupt police officers?" Langston couldn't speak. He just shook his head slowly. "Look out your window, Captain," Camille commanded softly. Langston turned his head, staring through the heavy Venetian blinds of his office window, which overlooked the precinct's front parking lot. The rain was still pouring down, but the gray morning was now illuminated by a sea of flashing red and blue lights. There were no precinct cruisers out there. Instead, there were sleek, unmarked black SUVs, heavily armored tactical vehicles, and dark blue state trooper interceptors blocking every single exit. Dozens of heavily armed men and women wearing tactical vests emblazoned with FBI and state police were spilling out of the vehicles, raising their rifles and forming a perimeter around the precinct. "They aren't coming to bail you out, Victor," Camille said, closing the files and neatly stacking them on the desk. "They're coming to take my building back." The heavy, soundproof door of Captain Langston's office muffled the sudden explosion of noise from the booking room, but it couldn't hide the vibration of the floorboards. The precinct was being breached. Through the frosted glass of the office partition, Langston and Harlan watched in paralyzed horror as heavily armored tactical units poured through the rear and front entrances simultaneously. The loud, booming voice of a federal agent cut through the precinct's ambient noise, amplified by a bullhorn. "Federal agents, stand down. Step away from your desks and keep your hands where we can see them." Out on the floor, Desk Sergeant Malcolm Voss didn't even attempt to reach for his weapon. He slowly raised his hands and laced his fingers behind his head, sinking to his knees before a tactical officer even reached him. Several other corrupt patrolmen, men who had felt untouchable just minutes prior, were swiftly disarmed and pushed against the very brick walls they used to press suspects against. Inside the mahogany-paneled office, Captain Langston finally found his voice. It was frail, stripped of all its former booming bravado. "Judge Thornton," Langston pleaded, taking a desperate step toward the desk. "We can make a deal. I know where the money is buried. I have the ledger for the local judges who look the other way. I can give you the mayor's chief of staff. Just let me make a phone call." Camille didn't move. She remained seated in his luxurious leather chair, her expression carved from stone. "You misunderstand your position, Victor," Camille replied, her voice eerily calm against the backdrop of the chaos outside. "You are no longer a power broker. You have nothing to trade because my task force already has the ledger, the accounts, and the wiretaps. You are just a man who is going to spend the rest of his life in a federal penitentiary." Before Langston could utter another word, his office door was kicked open with enough force to crack the door frame. 3 FBI SWAT operators flooded the room, their rifles raised and lasers painting the chests of Langston and Harlan. Right behind them stepped Special Agent Marcus Reed, a tall, no-nonsense veteran of the Bureau's Anti-Corruption Division. He stepped into the room, his eyes scanning the suspects before landing on Camille. "Judge Thornton," Agent Reed said, giving a curt, respectful nod. "Are you injured?" Camille slowly stood up from the desk, picking up her leather satchel. "I have some minor bruising from the unlawful restraint, Agent Reed. Aside from that, I am perfectly fine." Reed turned his attention to the 2 men standing in the center of the room. Officer Derek Harlan was trembling violently. The aggressive, hot-headed cop, who had violently slammed a black woman against a rental car earlier, was now openly weeping, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "Derek Harlan, Victor Langston," Reed announced, his voice carrying the finality of a judge's sentence. "You are under arrest for racketeering, extortion, wire fraud, civil rights violations, and assaulting a state official. Hands behind your backs." "I didn't know," Harlan sobbed as 2 SWAT operators grabbed him roughly, twisting his arms behind him. "I didn't know she was a judge. It was a mistake." "The mistake wasn't who you assaulted, Harlan," Camille said quietly as she walked past him. "The mistake was that you thought the badge made you a god. Today you learned you are just a mortal." Click, click. The sound of federal handcuffs locking around Harlan's wrists echoed in the room. It was a poetic symmetry that brought a cold satisfaction to Camille's chest. Langston, for his part, remained stoic, though his eyes were completely dead. He offered no resistance as he was cuffed and led out of his own office in disgrace. As the operators cleared the room, leaving only Camille, Agent Reed, and the terrified rookie, Nolan Pierce. Reed paused. "What about this one, Judge?" Reed asked, nodding toward Pierce, who was pressed against the bookshelf, looking like he expected to be shot. Camille looked at the young man. She remembered how he had hesitated in the parking lot. She remembered how he had handled the sealed files with care, and how he had tried, however weakly, to de-escalate his partner's violence. More importantly, she remembered that he had secretly cooperated with Internal Affairs recently, providing the dashcam footage that cemented Harlan's downfall. Officer Pierce is a cooperating federal witness, Camille stated. He will be escorted safely to the Attorney General's office to finalize his deposition. See that he gets there securely, Marcus. Pierce let out a shuddering breath, his knees nearly giving out. Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you. Don't thank me, Officer Pierce, Camille warned, her tone softening only slightly. You stood by while a man abused his power. You are getting a second chance because you finally chose the right side of the line. Make sure you never cross it again. With that, Camille Thornton adjusted her oversized beige trench coat, tightened her grip on her leather satchel, and walked out of the precinct commander's office. She strode across the chaotic booking floor, past the handcuffed, disgraced officers who had once ruled the area, and stepped out the front doors into the pouring rain. A sleek black FBI SUV was idling at the curb, its back door held open by a federal agent. Camille climbed inside, the heavy door slamming shut behind her, finally insulating her from the storm. By midday, the rain had finally stopped, giving way to a pale, piercing sunlight that washed over the county. The local news networks were in an absolute frenzy. Helicopters circled the precinct, broadcasting live footage of the FBI hauling out boxes of evidence, computers, and files. The breaking news chyron at the bottom of every screen read in bold flashing letters, "Massive corruption bust at local precinct. Captain and dozens of officers arrested." Inside the county courthouse, the atmosphere was electric with hushed whispers and panicked phone calls. Judges, prosecutors, and defense attorneys were glued to the televisions in the break rooms. The untouchable fortress of the local police had fallen in a single morning. In her secure private chambers on the top floor of the courthouse, Judge Camille Thornton sat at her heavy oak desk. The room was immaculate, lined with volumes of state statutes and legal precedent. The cheap sweatpants and the oversized trench coat were gone. Her senior clerk, a sharp young woman named Elena Vargas, knocked softly on the heavy wooden door before entering. She carried a steaming cup of Earl Grey tea and a fresh stack of dockets. "Your tea, Judge," Elena said, setting the cup down carefully. She looked at Camille with a mixture of profound awe and lingering concern. "The mayor's office has called multiple times. The governor's office called as well. They all want statements." "Let them leave voicemails, Elena," Camille replied smoothly, taking a sip of the tea. The warmth soothed her throat. "We are not politicians. We do not hold press conferences to brag about doing our jobs." Agent Reed also called to confirm that Victor Langston and Derek Harlan have been processed at the federal holding facility. Bail was denied as they are considered severe flight risks, Elena reported, a faint smile touching her lips. "Excellent," Camille murmured. She opened the heavy leather satchel that sat on the corner of her desk. She withdrew the manila folders, the very same folders that had been thrown onto the wet pavement of the parking lot, the folders that Harlan had so arrogantly claimed as stolen property. She took out a black fountain pen, uncapped it, and systematically went through the paperwork. One by one, she signed her name with deliberate, sweeping strokes at the bottom of the federal arrest warrants, retroactively authorizing the sweep that had just taken place. The trap had worked flawlessly. The corrupt network had been so blinded by their own prejudice and unchecked power that they had eagerly arrested the one person capable of ending their careers, dragging the evidence of their own destruction directly into their headquarters. Camille stood up from her desk. She walked over to the mahogany wardrobe in the corner of her chambers and opened it. Inside hung her judicial robe, a heavy flowing garment of pure black. She slipped it on, feeling the familiar grounding weight of the fabric settle onto her shoulders. She adjusted the collar, ensuring it sat perfectly straight. The bruising on her wrists throbbed slightly beneath the billowing sleeves, a lingering reminder of the morning's violence. But it was a pain she welcomed. It was the price of the purge. "Are we ready for the afternoon docket, Elena?" Camille asked, her voice echoing with commanding resonance in the quiet room. "We are, Your Honor. The courtroom is full," Elena replied, holding the door open. Judge Camille Thornton walked out of her chambers and down the long, carpeted hallway toward the courtroom. The bailiff, an older gentleman who had served the court for many years, stood at attention as she approached. He opened the heavy double doors leading to the bench. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed across the packed, murmuring courtroom. Instantly, the chatter ceased. Every lawyer, every defendant, and every spectator stood up in total silence. Camille ascended the steps to the elevated bench. She looked out over the room, her piercing gaze sweeping across the faces of the legal establishment. They all knew what she had done that morning. They knew that the era of backroom deals, protected officers, and judicial blindness was officially dead. She sat down in her high-backed leather chair. "You may be seated," Camille commanded. She picked up her wooden gavel, feeling the smooth, polished handle in her grip. She raised it into the air and brought it down against the sounding block with a sharp, echoing crack that signaled the beginning of a new order. Court is now in session. If you enjoyed this intense, real-life story of justice served and corrupt power completely dismantled, make sure you hit that like button right now. It helps push these incredible stories to more people who need to hear them. Don't forget to share this video with your friends to show them what happens when unchecked arrogance meets true calculated authority. And if you want more gripping, high-stakes storytelling filled with drama and satisfying twists, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for the next case.